Hey everybody, it's another re-review of the Showdown in the Badlands set. This time it is for Hunter, Mage and Paladin, and oh boy, there are some bad ratings for me in here. First up, we have Hunter. I'm just going to do a lot of Hunter's cards together because Hunter has quite a large variety of decks I think will spawn from this expansion. And then finally, I think there's going to be a Highlander Hunter deck. And I was a bit, underwhelmed by it because Feldra in the Lost is not a great effect to run a Highlander deck. However, Reno is now being shown to be a thing. And I think Reno makes it worth running this Highlander Beast Hunter. So, first up, I'm going to give 3 stars to Sneaky Snake, Saddle Up, and Bovine Skeleton. I think they will all go in the token aggressive Beast Hunter deck. I don't think they'll go into this Highlander deck. I think the Sneaky Snakes is going to be... I just don't think you're going to have enough cards to buff up the Sneaky Snakes to justify running it as a one-off. I think you're going to run other cards that shoot for other cards instead, like drawing cards, like drawing your 1-cost spells. I think you'll never get a big enough board for Saddle Up to be worth it. Bovine Skeleton may make the deck, but I think there are better 3-drop options for the Highlander deck. The rest of these cards, all getting 4 stars. I think Highlander Beast Hunter is going to be a tier 2 deck. And I think Messenger Buzzard, 10-Gallon Hat, Camouflage Mount, Spurfang, Silver Serpent, and Feldra in the Lost will all go into that deck. Despite the fact I think Feldra in the Lost is very underwhelming, you will still run it in the Highlander deck. I should have mentioned as well, before I did all these star ratings, again, a lot of people are underwhelmed by the set, but the fact that Highlander is a mechanic of the set means that it kind of artificially elevates the scores of some of these cards, because you're going to be running more of them as one-ofs in decks than you otherwise would be if you were running, like, non-Highlander decks. Okay, there's a lot to unpack here in this section. I wanted to leave that thing in at the end because it just explains some of my other ratings for this episode, including in this pack. I, coming into the expansion, thought Highlander was going to be a huge thing. I thought some classes would go Highlander. Even when they didn't have a Highlander payoff, for example, I thought Mage might try it. Because Reno was such a strong card that I was like, why not? Like, if you've got a good enough set of cards to do it, then why wouldn't you do it? And I kind of put Hunter in this realm of they have got a lot of good cards. They can make a Highlander deck work. And they did make a Highlander deck work, to be fair. One thing I will actually say of all my ratings, and I do think that you have to give, and we'll get to this way later down the line, you have to give Reno like 5 stars. But I don't think Reno had as big an impact on the game as I thought it was going to be. I was imagining it more like a Dragon Queen Alexstrasza, where it was such a huge tempo swing that you kind of would twist your decks around this because the payoff was so huge. It was a big payoff for Reno, but I don't think it was necessarily the biggest Highlander payoff we've ever seen. Getting back to the ratings of these cards though, Sneaky Snakes and Saddle Up was actually pretty close on. I think these were both 2 stars. There was a aggressive Face Hunter tokeny deck. Unfortunately, it got blew out the water by Demon Hunter, the aggro one, the Naga one. It also got blew out the water by Paladin, unfortunately. So it never really got time to shine. It does sit somewhere around tier 4 right now. I actually played a little bit of it off camera and had some limited success with it, but yeah, I'd say they were both 2 stars. A bit of a temptation with testing, but nothing beyond that. Watch this space though, if there isn't any more token spot for Hunter. These cards could really push up into towards the 5-star region. I sincerely believe that. Bovine Skeleton, on the other hand, doesn't. It's 1 star. Too slow. Now for the next set of cards, and I guess Bovine Skeleton does somewhat incorporate into this. I thought maybe there would be a plug-and-play package for the Highlander and just for Hunter decks in general, which would be this buff Beast Hunter. I did appreciate it was going to be slow, but I thought the board would get so sticky that it was hard to remove, and you could just chip down your opponent's face. I sort of saw it as the token deck was at the aggressive range, and then this Spurfang, Bovine Skeleton, the Twisted Frostwing as well from the mini set would be a more mid-range variant. Still aggressive, but you could go a little bit later into the game. That package never came to fruition, so 10-Gallon Hat and Spurfang were 1 star because of that. And similarly, Bovine Skeleton 1 star because of that. Messenger Buzzard, on the other hand, was 5 stars because a deck form that I did not anticipate, which was Cleave Hunter. Very briefly, this was... some people would argue it wasn't tier 1. It saw a lot of play for 2 days, so I don't think it was tier 1. I think it was fair to say it was tier 2. It got solved pretty damn quickly and then got nerfed subsequently. But because Messenger Buzzard saw play in this deck, and it saw play in the Highlander Hunter deck, which was also tier 2, I think it's fair to give it a 5-star rating. Camouflage Mount also should have been 2 stars. I've seen this played in some of the Highlander Hunter decks. Not all of them, but some of them, so I think it's fair enough to give that a 2-star as well rather than a 1-star. Silver Serpent should have been 1-star. The real problem with this plug-and-play package is if you didn't use it, then what did people use? They used Big Beast Hunter, right? The good old Big Beast Hunter. We'd had a few metas of really strong Big Beast Hunter decks, and this support just helped them in the end, and you couldn't run cheap beasts because of it. So Silver Serpent, Spurfang, Bovine Skeleton, no chance of running them. They were all 1-stars. Feldrin though, 4 stars as well. Highlander, Hunter, it wasn't at the top end of tier 2 for the most part. I think it was at the bottom of the tier 2, but especially the big Thunderbringer package, that was a scary little deck. So I think it's fair enough to give it 4 stars as well. Then finally, the last card they got was Star Shooter, which was clearly meant for an Arcane Hunter deck. And I ummed and ahed over this. I honestly went from giving this 1 star to giving it 5 stars. But after like playing around with it and looking at deck lists for this type of deck, I've come to the conclusion it's going to be 2 stars. I think it's going to be tested, but not good enough. Man, I'm good. Yeah, so as a reminder going into this expansion, Arcane Hunter was the strongest, well, arguably the strongest Hunter package there was. You would play some cheap, you'd play some low-cost minions, some secrets, some like tokens, and eventually you would get to the point where you would buff all of your arcane spells in your hand and ideally in your deck, and you would pew down your opponent with also weapon swings to just get you over the line. It was really obnoxious to play against because there was not a lot of like minion on minion combat. It was a lot of I'm going to shoot you in the face with spells combat. I mean, that deck got a few nerfs going into this expansion, so it kind of dropped off a little bit. I was wondering if Star Shooter would be the piece of the puzzle that would, bring it back to glory. But after thinking about it, it was 3 weapon swings. It was too slow to generate these arcane shots. And indeed, that was the case. I did see it getting some testing. I've seen some Arcane Hunter builds. But Star Shooter is just not good enough. You can even argue this was 1 star, to be honest with you. They have the Excavate package, which I've thrown Taithalan the Blood Watcher in there, just because I think he's kind of was designed with the intention of going into this. Generate a bunch of cards deck, play them for the cheap. Cryopreservation, Blast Mage Miner, Reliquary Researcher, that's the payoff for your excavation. Cryopreservation and Blast Mage Miner are so bad as cards, I'm giving these 3 cards 1 star. I don't think the Excavation Mage package will be a thing. So irrespective of the fact that Reliquary Researcher is actually a really good payoff for excavating twice, is a really good value. The Excavate cards are just so bad that I don't think you will ever justify running it in a deck. Taithalan, on the other hand, I'm going to give 2 stars to. I think it will see testing. Okay, let me explain. I think this was not a completely unhinged take. Now, with obviously hindsight, there is a lot of minor mage out there, and all of these cards you play in that deck, and at the very least, they're tier 2, so all these cards should be at the very least 4 stars. What ended up tripping me up on this one was, I recognized, and I even mentioned it, I cut that little segment into this part, I recognized that Reliquary Research, the payoff is actually humongous on it. Casting 2 Mage Secrets is 6 mana of cost. This was a 4 mana 3/5. You could have argued this was like a -2 3/5. And that was good enough value for you to run your Excavate cards. It was worth running 2 bad cards and then 2 other pretty bad cards to make Reliquary Researcher work. Now, I will say as a side note on this, the main reason why this is good is because of the existence of Objection and Counterspell. It made it really hard for your opponent to play efficiently from then onwards once you start playing Reliquary Researchers, because you didn't get to pick the Mage Secrets. But you always have to be aware that it could be Objection, it could be Counterspell, it could be Explosive Runes as well. So you made your opponents play really unoptimally, and sometimes you would just high roll and get Objection like, 2 additional times. And some people started running Objection in their decks as well. And you just stopped your opponent from doing things. So literally, Reliquary Researcher carried the Excavate cards into the 4-star tiers. So Cryopreservation, Blast Mage Miner, and Reliquary Research were all 4-star cards. I still maintain, though, that Cryopreservation and Blast Mage Miner are not good cards in their own right, and we're about to have Objection rotated out of the main set, so I'm intrigued to see if this will still hold up. It really depends what other secret gets added to the game, if any other gets added. Also, what the core set of secrets are going to be for Mage. So watch this space. I would not be completely shocked if this just drops off a cliff. The other funny thing about this package is I also rated it pretty low because the excavation reward for Mage, which is the Netherite Hawk, right? I didn't think it was... I thought it was a good payoff, but I didn't think it was necessarily the best payoff you could have had. And actually, I still maintain that is true. I really think that the Excavate package was all for Relic of the Researcher, not even the main treasure at the end of it. I will say as well, they did buff Excavation during the expansion, so all the Excavate cards were slightly better than, you know... I'd expect them to be when I made these ratings, but I was off the mark on these ones. They were 4 stars, fair enough. My other unhinged take, potentially, is that it found its way mainly into mining Rainbow Mage with Sif in there. I still think good old Rainbow Mage without the excavation package is stronger. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is just more disruptive. Maybe it just depends on the meta. Finally, Tathlon I gave 2 stars to. It wasn't even 2 stars, it was 1 star. Everyone saw from a mile away this card was going to be a bit weak. I thought some people might mess about with it. I think it was meant for this like excavation and this rainbow package, but the payoff just wasn't good enough, right? If you're generating treasures, the most expensive treasure is 4 cost, so you're only looking at like a 3 mana discount, and it's a 4 mana card, so yeah, it was just too expensive for what it did. Then we have the big Spell Mage enabler, Sunset Volley. I've actually put together a big Spell Mage list. I don't think it's actually that far away from being something that is kind of interesting at the very least. But if you compare it to Big Spell Mage from like a year ago, who had the Puzzle Box of Yogg-Saron, and they had the Drakefire Amulet, what is the big spells right now for Mage? It's Sunset Volley and the Arcane Defenders. It's just not a good comparison. So I'm going to give this 1 star right now. I don't think it's even going to be like tier 4 status. But I'm right. Sunset Volley was 1 star. There's not enough support for Big Spell Mage right now. A bit of a watch this space though in this card. I do think it's not a million miles away from Big Spell Mage to work. I do think you need a better Big Spell though than Sunset Volley and Arcane Defenders. If you got one really top-notch one, you might want to run Sunset Volley as like a 1-of in there. Maybe even you run it as the other 2-of. If you can cheat out 10 damage split amongst all enemies and something around random 10 cost, that's pretty good value, right? But there's just not enough ways to cheat it right now. Nor there are enough ways to survive until that point in the game, especially considering the existence of Paladin and Naga Demon Hunter in the early stages. Similarly, Stargazing. Draw a different arcane spell if you play this turn it cast twice. I'm giving this 2 stars. I think this will see some play, and I'm going to mention a deck in a moment that I think you might see some play in. But the Arcane Vexalis package, which I think is the deck that would most likely want to run the Stargazing, I just don't think you're going to need it. Vexalis will just fill that niche for you. The other situation where I think you might want to play Stargazing is with your big Spell Mage package with Arcane Defenders. For 10 mana you get 4, 5, 6s, right, with Taunt and Can't Be Targeted. That's pretty obnoxious for 10, but I don't think it is worth the 2-card combo and waiting for 10 mana. And I don't think you could put Stargazing in your big Spell Mage deck because you're going to be probably running the Naga that swaps the costs of spells from your hand with your opponents. So you can't have cheap spells in there, so Stargazing wouldn't get in there. The other place it might see play is actually in a Rainbow Mage-like deck because they have got arcane spells that draw cards, namely Wisdom of Norganon and sometimes Volume Up. But I think Stargazing into like Volume Up, especially if you get the Finale effect, it's 6 mana, draw 8. It's a lot of draw, but it might be too much draw. Damn, I had all the pieces of the puzzles together, and I just started mashing the pieces together at the end. This was a 4-star card, but kind of like under the radar 4-star card. It's found its way into Rainbow Mage, and I was so close with it. I was right, it's too much draw when you run it with Volume Up. But if you just run it with Wisdom of Norganon and Stargazing, then it is much more palatable. So it found its way into Rainbow Mage. It also found its way into Highlander Rainbow Mage, which I don't think is a particularly good deck, it turned out, but it did get into there. So I think this is actually like a low-key 4-star card. However, you could definitely run this deck without Stargazing using Volume Up instead, which is actually what was going on before Stargazing was released. So I just didn't think it was going to usurp it. It did usurp it in the end. Yeah. It's a little bit of a my bad moment, but at the same time, you see in the tier 2 decks, not always though, not a necessity card for that deck, but it's a pretty strong one, so say what you want about it. I think it'd be fair by my rating system to give this 4 stars. You might disagree and say, like, you know, you're being harsh on yourself, give it 3 stars. Then we have Azurite Vein, the new secret. 1 star, this card is actually awful. Yeah, it is, it's awful. Then we get to some cards that I think might see some play, but it won't be in a tier 1 or a tier 2 deck. Elemental Mage, I think, is going to slot somewhere in the tier 3 region, so I've given both of these 3 stars. Your tempo out your elementals, and just keep trying to smoke your opponent's face, and then you'll try and finish them off with some spell damage. So Elemental Mage is a thing, and it is sat somewhere around tier 4, tier 3 region. So I'm going to be generous and say Overflow Surger was right. I think it was a 3-star card. Meza June is sometimes around in that deck, but not always anymore. So I think this would be more fair to say it was a 2-star card. Running into this expansion, Elemental Mage was actually a very small thing where you would try and generate a bunch of elementals, use the tempo of the early elementals to, you know, smoke your opponent down. You would then smoke them down with Frozen Touch afterwards, and that was a pretty decent deck, actually. And I definitely did get caught out a few times mulliganing against Mage, where I was expecting this long, drawn-out combo game, and I just suddenly vomited like 12 elementals out in 3 turns, and I was like, holy shit, I'm going to lose the game. And indeed, I did lose the game. So, again, watch this space a little bit. I think the Elemental Mage package is interesting. The only downside to it is that Frozen Touch, I think, is about to rotate out the set, and I think that's a really core card for the archetype to work right now, but we'll see. We'll see if there's any more support for it in the future. And then finally, Heatwave. I was really underwhelmed by this, the Quick Draw card. Deal 2 damage to an enemy minion and its neighbours. Quick Draw, you do it to all enemies instead. It's a 1-mana discount on Consecration, and Consecration doesn't see that much play, right? So this is obviously going to be a pretty low-rated card. That's right, 5 stars. The first 5-star card I've rated is Heatwave. Now, hold up, partner, you got some explaining to do. All right, here's the explaining to do. So I got Reno'd. I was so scared of Reno being like this dominant force in the meta that I drew together other archetypes, other classes who wouldn't have a Reno payoff, and made a Reno deck. And Mage had been in such a strong place, with multiple decks being pretty strong, that I thought if any class could do this, it was Mage. They could make a Reno deck without any other Reno payoff other than Reno, and I thought it would be really, really strong. It'd be like having the good side of the control archetype and the good side of the combo, because I also had Sif in that deck. And one of the cards I put in that deck was Heatwave, and then I predicted that was going to be tier 1. So that's what really caught me out. I also, if you've seen some of my previous videos, I did make a Arcane Mage deck where, you know, I pew in the face. And Heatwave found its way into that deck as some early game control, which was very nice against Paladins, for example. So I'm going to give it 2 stars. I think that's realistically where it lay. It's definitely a card that gets teched into places, but it just didn't see the level of play I thought it was going to. Basically, Highlander Mage didn't make it as a thing. I did check on HS Replay early, and there are some crazy people out there, and it's not just me, that are running, still to this moment, Highlander, like some crazy stuff. Highlander Rainbow Mage. I've seen some with the Excavation package as a small effect in that as well, which seems crazy. But it seems to be like sitting around tier 3, which you might say is a 3-star, but I don't think there's enough data points to give it its 3rd star. But again, I think watch this card to some degree, because I can see it being pretty good if there's any more early game aggressive decks. And boy, were there some early game aggressive decks this expansion. The final other thing I will mention about Heatwave, and kind of why it didn't end up becoming this 5-star juggernaut, was that one card going into Highlander you really, really hated to run a 1 of was Cosmic Keyboard. It was such a huge tempo swing playing Cosmic Keyboard into something like Volume Up on 4 to give you a draw 4 situation, gain a 4/4. That's insane in the early game. Because of this, going to Highlander, you would have to cut one of the keyboards, replace it with a Heatwave. That's kind of what the replacement was. It just wasn't worth it, right? It wasn't good enough. Finally, we go into the land of the Paladin. Paladin has, I'd say, 2 big archetypes. They have Palahand, as I've been calling it, which is like, you know, the handlock equivalent for Paladin. This archetype is awful. There's not enough support. They're all getting 1 star. The legendary is woeful. Showdown might be one of the worst cards ever printed in Hearthstone. And I think Living Horizon and Lawful Longarm, the juice isn't going to be worth the squeeze to make your Palahand decks. And if you're not running these cards that fill your hand with other cards, I think the cards will be too slow. Showdown might be one of the worst cards ever printed in Hearthstone. Showdown might be one of the worst cards ever printed in Hearthstone.
Showdown might be one of the worst cards ever printed in Hearthstone.
Alright. In my defense, I don't think a lot of people saw this coming, and I did see other content creators giving Showdown, like, 0 ratings, basically. The thing that ended up making this card 5 stars was that it had an interaction with a card I didn't even consider. I saw this as like, you're generating 3 minions that you're going to buff. And obviously there was the situation, and we're going to see this card in a moment, with Prismatic Lens, where clearly the idea was you would generate 6 dudes and a Prismatic Lens your opponent's dude, so that you got 3 3/3s for 2 mana with Rush, which is a pretty good deal, right? There was one other card that interacted with generating a bunch of minions, and that was Sea Giant. So when the set came out, some of the top level Hearthstone players, I think Stinsy got, attributed with this, or at least I remember that as being the first decks out there, right? Stinsy, Sea Giant, Paladin, or Showdown Paladin. What would happen was you would play Showdown, you would summon 6 minions on the board, which would give your Sea Giant a 6 mana discount. And you could put Sea Giant onto the board on turn 4 or turn 5, which was unbelievably oppressive. Just playing an 8/8 on the board. I mean, even more oppressive was if you had 2 in hand, because then you'd play 16/16 on turn 4 or 5, and you would just blow your opponent out of the water. What was even worse, and this kind of contrived to be it was a hard card to rate in the end Showdown, I don't think a lot of people saw this coming, was that you could also tutor for the Sea Giants via the Order in the Court. And what even made it worse was that you normally wouldn't run a neutral in the Paladin decks. Paladins had all been running pure decks up until this point because of, the Countess. The Countess is insane. You could put the Countess in that deck because the 2 neutrals you put into the deck were more expensive than the Countess, so you could shoot it with Order in the Court, draw it, you would draw the other one, and then by the time you could, play the Countess, your deck would be empty of neutrals. You had your cake and you ate it. So, all in all, this, packaged together ended up putting Showdown into the 5-star Tier 1 deck. Showdown Paladin got nerfed because Order in the Court got a nerf. It didn't draw a card anymore, which was actually a pretty big thing. It slowed the whole thing down by a turn or 2. But even now, Showdown is still seeing play. It turns out that, I said with Prismatic Lens, I thought the combo was a little bit too, niche. It turns out it's not. People are still running it, and it's still good enough. Also, what people are running it with is actually Deputization Aura here on the right, which I'd argue as well. I'm going to give it 4 stars on here. It sees playing in a lot of variety decks. The other thing is Paladin has so many flavors of decks, it's so hard to put one of these cards in each individual one. And a lot of them saw testing, and a lot of them were really good. But yeah, Deputization Aura with Showdown, if you trade your minions in an appropriate fashion, you gain 18 health from the combo, which is really good, right? 18 health, clear the board ideally, or at least clear some significant threats from the board. Very strong, and you could set up the aura a turn earlier. So it made it all a bit more palatable. Living Horizon as well, that should have been a 4-star card. That sees some playing aggro Paladin. Not all aggro Paladins, but it's certainly seen playing Tier 2 aggro Paladins right now. And I think I didn't really count for either, was there was a lot of ways to generate more cards for Paladin in your hand, other than running Badlands Bandits. You could run the 1 mana generate 2 silver hands that go into your hand card. And it wasn't too hard to restrict from the Living Horizon to, be played early, at least cheated out pretty early. The 2 that I did get more appropriate, though, Lawful Longarm didn't really see that much play. It saw some testing in Highlander Paladin, so I'm going to give that 1 or 2 stars instead. It's a decent card, but nothing fantastic. Certainly didn't make its way into the Tier 1 or Tier 2 decks. And Badlands Bandit was just bad, it was 1 star. We called that one right. But overall, these 5 cards, which I think were meant to be utilized together, ended up getting split and pulled apart into lots of different decks, and Paladin was just really strong this expansion. Where I think Paladin might get a little bit of joy though this set is this Highlander value Paladin. I think it might be the last bastion of, I'm not running a control deck, I'm not running a combo deck, I'm running a value deck. This will be the last hurrah of the value deck, because I don't see many of the other ones working particularly well. So I'm giving these 4 stars. I think it'll be in tier 2. I don't think it's going to, pull up the trees in tier 2. I think it's actually going to sit somewhere pretty low down in it, maybe even go into tier 3. I might be looking at it through Paladin tinted glasses, to be honest with you. My glasses were indeed Paladin tinted. So, funnily enough, I got Hi-Ho Silverwing right, but for the wrong reasons. Prismatic Beam I got right for the wrong reasons, although that probably was a 5-star card, let's be honest with you. And actually, Hi-Ho Silverwing, you'd argue, was a 5-star card as well. But this idea of the Highlander package, this insane value, this mid-range value snog-off, just didn't work. It sadly got outvalued. Well, now it gets outvalued by Mining Rogue, but no one could predict where Mining Rogue would end up from the start of the set. But it got into this awkward situation that it couldn't beat, or really couldn't beat the combo Mage decks, the Rainbow Mage, because they had a win condition. It struggled against early aggression, funnily enough from its own class, like the aggro Paladin decks it would struggle to beat, the Holy Paladin deck it would struggle to beat. Hell, even the Earthen Paladin deck it struggled to beat. It also struggled in the Naga Demon Hunter matchup, so it was just a lot of things contrived together. Basically, combo decks were strong and very, very aggressive decks were strong this expansion. And it just crushed every deck in the middle. So anything that was running for, mid-range value was just killed. So Spirit of the Badlands, I think you could argue that it was a 2-star card. A lot of people tested this. I think a lot of people wanted it to work. It was probably 1-star though. Similarly, lay down the law, the Controlia, longer range Paladin decks never became a thing, so this was another 1-star card. Just doesn't see enough play. We were wrong on... I was wrong on Hi-Ho Silverwing. It ended up going into Holy Paladin, which was a deck where you would always have a minion on board, or you'll try to endeavor to have a minion always on board. Facilitated by the fact that every single Paladin minion apparently has to have a Divine Shield right now. And then you would just giga buff them out of control. And Hi-Ho Silverwing was very good. It tutored for the holy spells that you wanted to play, so that your... The Divine Guardian, whatever it's called, the potentially 0-mana 5/5 gain Divine Shield card would, get discounted towards that 0-mana state. Also, it had a draw on it. I did think, and I can't remember if I mentioned this, I cut it out of this, but I thought this was a card to watch out for. It's a very strong card. It's, 2-mana 2/1 draw a card, and tutor specifically for 1 card. And it has Divine Shield, so it's not actually a bad stat line. Just an all-around good card. Prismatic Beam, I've mentioned it already, so I'm not going to go into it too much further. It didn't really see... Well, it does see play in the Control Paladin decks, the crazy people that are still running it. But where it really found success was this Showdown Paladin deck, so... And it still finds some love in the aggressive Paladin deck, so I think it's fair enough to say this was a 4 or a 5-star card. Holy Cowboy, on the other hand, I'm only giving it 2 stars, but it's a bit of a watch this space card. This is the last card for this episode that we're going to re-review, and I was right. I think this is a really good card. It just doesn't have the set built around it to make this useful. So many holy spells right now in Paladin are cheap anyway, so you don't get the full benefit of the discount. Secondly, you get rewarded for spending the mana of holy spells via the Guardian's Grace. Again, I can't remember exactly if that's the name of the card, but bear with me. You get rewarded for spending mana on holy spells, so Holy Cowboy was anti-synergistic with that. Now, the sets are about to rotate around. We're going to lose the Guardian's Grace. We're actually going to lose a lot of the holy support, I think, for Paladin, from memories serving me. So maybe Holy Cowboy will find a use in the future, but for now, I don't even know if you really saw enough testing to even warrant 2 stars. It was like the 1-2 star region. I don't think Holy Paladin even considers running it. It's not sticky enough, I suppose. Anyway, that's going to do it for this episode as well. If you've enjoyed this, why don't leave a like and subscribe? Everyone helps me out. And next time we are going to be doing Rogue, Shaman, and... Who's after that? Have I forgot someone? Paladin! I knew I'd forgot one. We're going to be doing Paladin, Rogue, and Shaman. Join me then.